I'll yield now to Mr. Reschenthaler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it. And Secretary Blinken, thanks for being here this morning. I wanted to just revisit some of the responses you gave to Ranking Member Granger. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you basically indicated that it was your belief that Iran and its proxies have been relatively well behaved since the Iran nuclear deal. I just got to push back on that a little bit, because I think it might be myopic just to focus on Iran itself. When Iran is funding proxy wars, the Houthi rebels, for example, in Yemen, propping up the Assad regime, money to Hamas in Israel, Hezbollah in Lebanon. So do you still stand behind that statement that Iran has been relatively well behaved since 2012?
Congressman, you're right that would be putting words in my mouth, because here's what I said, and if I didn't express myself as clearly as I should, let me try again. What I said was that in terms of Americans, diplomats, military, et cetera, in the Middle East, from 2012, when we started to negotiate the original agreement, to 2018, when the previous administration pulled out, there were virtually no attacks on our interests, in our immediate interests, diplomats, forces in the region. There were absolutely attacks against allies and partners, and that is a problem that we've been focused on during the pendency of the agreement. Nothing in the agreement took away from our ability to work with them to push back on that. But I was talking about Americans, and what we saw after pulling out of the agreement, after the designation of the IRGC as an FTO, after the killing of Soleimani, again, for whom no one is shedding a tear, we saw those attacks go up dramatically against Americans, 400% from 2019 to 2020, despite maximum pressure. And so the question is, how can we be most effective in two things? How can we be most effective in dealing with the Iranian nuclear program, which also has galloped forward under maximum pressure after we pulled out of the nuclear agreement, where they're now on the verge of having the capacity to produce fissile material for a nuclear weapon within the space of a couple of weeks, as opposed to more than a year under the agreement. And they continue to act even more aggressively. We have this policy that has been followed the last few years has not deterred them. On the contrary, they're doing worse in all areas, nuclear and the destabilizing activities. So I think the question we have to ask, all of us have to ask ourselves, because we have the same objective, is how can we be most effective in dealing with both of these problems?
Well, thanks for clarifying. I still have to push back, because I think we're still not looking at the Shia militia groups in Iraq, which are clearly being led by the IRGC. But
now they are. That's my point. What's happened? You're exactly right. What we've seen the last few years is an absolute increase in attacks by these groups. You're exactly right. But that was after we got out of the agreement, after the designation of the IRGC, after Soleimani, et cetera. So you're right. And we're deeply not only concerned about that, but acting against it. But my only point is none of this is a hypothetical exercise. We've seen what the world and the region looks like when we had the agreement. We've seen what it looks like without the agreement. We need to take stock of that and deal with that effectively.
I'm still incredibly concerned that if we do get an agreement, we're not going to be able to do anything to protect our allies in the region, specifically Israel, and also we're not going to be we're not going to be able to control Iran to use the proxy groups in Iraq, the Shia militias, to attack our bases in Iraq. But I only have a minute left, Mr. Secretary, and I would really like to talk about Taiwan. I think that Dictator Xi is looking at the disaster that was the withdrawal in Afghanistan, the weakness I think we've shown vis-a-vis supporting Ukraine. I think we should be much more robust in our support, and we should have done more earlier. But be that as it may, I'm very concerned that the CCP will invade Taiwan. Do you think that we should just affirmatively right now say that we will militarily defend Taiwan? And additionally, what can we be doing now to give Taiwan the weapons they need to defend against an invasion?
I share your concerns about Taiwan. We've seen Beijing act increasingly aggressively toward Taiwan over the last few years. I'd say two things. First, I think that Beijing does and is looking very carefully at what's happening in the response to Russia's aggression against Ukraine, and is seeing this extraordinary response that American leadership helped produce in terms of the massive consequences we made clear would follow if Russia committed the aggression. And the unprecedented sanctions, the unprecedented export controls against Russia are having a devastating effect. In the near term on its economy, we're looking at a 15% contraction of the Russian economy. All of the gains of the last 15 years wiped out. We're looking at Russia being unable to modernize key industries, including defense, including energy exploration. All of this, and we've seen the exodus, as you know, of something like 800 companies from Russia because of reputational risk. So, quickly put, the response that we've given to Ukraine, I think, is concentrating some minds in Beijing. But second, and to your point as well, it is vital that we continue to do everything that we've been doing over many years and are continuing to do now to make sure that Taiwan has the means to defend itself. And we've seen significant transfers of defense articles to them. We've had about $18 billion in foreign military sales since 2017. That pace continues. We've had about $2.5 billion in direct commercial sales. And we are looking to do a number of things, including improving delivery timelines, an intense focus on that, but also making sure that Taiwan is thinking in terms of asymmetric defense to any kind of potential aggression from Beijing, and working closely with them on that. So I think we need to be continuing down that track. We've had on Taiwan for many decades a success in making sure that its democracy could thrive and emerge while the status quo was preserved, both by Beijing and by Washington. The challenge to that status quo is coming from Beijing, and we need to make sure that Taiwan has the means to defend itself so that it deters any possible aggression.
But what about just affirmatively saying that we'll
yield to Ms. Frankel now, Mr. Reschenthaler? You're 5 minutes.
I know, but Madam Chair, the question wasn't answered. I mean, the question was, can we just affirmatively say that we'll defend Taiwan militarily? It wasn't answered.
We're going to try to have a second round where we can follow up. Okay.
Thanks,
you.
Mr. Secretary. Thanks, Madam Chair.